Hello and welcome to my channel. Today is Wisdom Wednesdays, where I bring you literature for spiritual enlightenment purposes and to assist with the ascension process, to bring healing to both the divine feminine and the divine masculine. And I will be reading the book Mary Magdalene Revealed, uh, continuing from where we left off. This is a book by Megan Watterson. It is the first apostle, her feminist gospel, and the Christianity that we haven't tried. Why I could kiss a Copt. I am the first and the last. I am she who is honored and she who is scorned. I am the whore and the holy woman. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the bride and the bridegroom. I am she, the Lord. The thunder, perfect mind. Chapter 1, verse 5 to 10. The earliest evidence of the lost gospel of Mary Magdalene was discovered in January 1896 at an antiquities market in Cairo by a German scholar named Karl Reinhardt. It was written in Coptic on ancient papyrus. Coptic is an Egyptian language that is still used by Egyptian Christians called Copts. It was placed in the Egyptian Museum in Berlin with the official title and catalog number of Codex Berlinen. I'm so sorry. Berlinensis. I'm so pronounced that wrong. 8502, which is a mouthful. There you go. Confirmation. So scholars refer to it as the Berlin Codex. There we go. Egyptologist Carl Schmidt set about creating a German translation of the Gospel, except for the missing pages. The text was in good condition, and since Coptic script was used almost exclusively by Copts, Schmidt concluded that their communities in Egypt were the ones to translate, preserve, and perhaps even to save the Gospel of Mary from complete erasure. The publication of Schmidt's translation of the Gospel of Mary was ready to go to printing press in Leipzig in 1912, but just as the printer was nearing completion, a water pipe burst and destroyed the entire first edition. Schmidt tried to salvage the mess, but was interrupted by World War I. And then before he could return to Leipzig to resurrect the project, he died in 1938. He bequeathed the project to another scholar by the name of Walter Till. In the meantime, in 1917, a small 3rd century Greek fragment of the Gospel of Mary was found. It's known as Papyrus Rylands 463 and was discovered in Egypt at Oxyrhynchus. No idea. Sorry. That's a hard one to do. This version added clearer confirmation to passages of the Berlin Codex and also additional evidence about the Gospel's early date. Walter Till incorporated the new information into his translation of the Gospel of Mary. It was ready to go to print in 1943, but by this time, World War II made the publication of Mary's Gospel again impossible. And then Till gave up his attempts altogether. Sounds a lot like spiritual warfare, like big time. Sabotage. Someone didn't want it printed. When the war was over, there had been a discovery in a village called Nag Hammadi in Egypt of a large amount of early Christian scripture. For example, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and this powerful and poetic piece of scripture called The Thunder, the Perfect Mind, among many others. No copies of the Gospel of Mary were found among the preserved texts at Nag Hammadi. However, the two texts that were found within the Berlin Codex, rolled up with the Gospel of Mary, appeared among the mass findings of manuscripts. The Apocryphon of John and the Sophia of Jesus Christ. These texts discovered at Nag Hammadi were collectively referred to as the Gnostic Gospels because they focus on gnosis, which is a Greek term meaning self-knowledge, or more specifically, the knowledge that comes from direct experience. The label Gnostic, though, created a misperception around these early Christian texts, and Mary's Gospel got thrown into the confusion. So let's be clear. There is no such thing as Gnosticism. There wasn't a cult of organized Gnostics. These ancient texts define. These texts, including the Gospel of Mary, are evidence of the various forms of Christianities that existed before the 4th century, when the current form of the Bible was codified. I know I just made Christianity plural there, but this is what these ancient texts prove. There were many threads of Christianity in the wake of Christ, and one of those threads, let's call it a red one, believed women were as worthy as men to teach and lead the church. But this wasn't obviously the thread that won out. Here's a curious sympathy or synchronicity. Supposedly, these texts found at Nag Hammadi were smuggled from out of Egypt and sequestered for a while in the manuscript collection of the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung. Oh, fascinating. Yes, this is fascinating, to me at least, because Jung believed that the church would die without the mother, and that the feminine had been submerged in our collective unconscious. He also wrote the Red Book, which is essentially his efforts to connect directly to his soul. The commonality between all of these early Christian sacred texts found buried in Egypt is that they spoke of this hidden, more human and feminine side of Christ, of Mary Magdalene's importance, and of salvation as an inward act of personal transformation. The Nag Hammadi findings were at least released to a panel of international scholars to begin to assess their import and contribution to understanding the beliefs of some of the earliest Christians. So although Mary's Gospel was found in 1896, the first print edition of her Gospel wasn't published until 1955. Mary's Gospel is the only Gospel written in the name of a woman. A third and potentially final version of the Gospel of Mary has been found, also in Greek, and also at Oxyrhynchus, in northern Egypt. This is a very significant discovery, as author, scholar, and Harvard Divinity professor Dr. Karen King explains in her translation of Mary's Gospel. Because it is unusual for several copies from such early dates to have survived, the attestation of the Gospel of Mary as an early Christian work is unusually strong. Sorry for the interruption. My little buddy is joining us. Episcopal priest and author Cynthia Bourget claims that if Dr. Karen King is correct, this would place the Gospel of Mary Magdalene within the earliest strata of Christian writings, roughly contemporary with the Gospel of John. This arduous and somewhat calamitous process of Mary's Gospel finally making its way into press feels significant to me. It reflects the most magnetic reluctance of shifting our perspective about her, like the author of what it would take for a river, sorry, like the effort of what it would take for a river to change direction. And for me, it reflects the process of what it has taken for me personally to share my truth about who she is and the truth about how her gospel has impacted my life. As we make our way through each passage Mary's gospel contains, I've also included passages at the start of certain chapters from these three texts: the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, and the Thunder of the Perfect Mind, because they help to contextualize Mary's gospel. Her gospel wasn't this one-off unicorn among horses type of scripture. Reading it alongside these other gospels and early Christian scripture allows us to see that it was a part of a community of belief. I've been trained as a theologian, which just means a person who engages in the study of God. Oh, I guess I might be a theologian too then. Or in my case, a person who engages in the study of all that has been left out of our ideas of God. I will draw from my direct experience and illuminate each passage as far as I'm able to, and also move us through the legend of Mary Magdalene herself and her misunderstood status as the penitent prostitute to reveal a much more historically and theologically accurate version of who she was and remains. Sorry, honey. The seven powers mentioned in Mary's gospel: darkness, craving, ignorance, craving for death, enslavement to the physical body, the false peace of the flesh, and the compulsion of rage, are the precursors to Christianity's seven deadly sins: pride, greed, envy, gluttony, lust, sloth, and anger. And I believe they are the seven demons that Luke chapter 8, verse 2 of the Bible claims were expelled from Mary. With him went the 12, as well as some women who had been healed of wicked spirits and of infirmities. They were Mary, known as Mary of Magdala, from whom 7 demons had been expelled. The emphasis of that passage is traditionally on the fact that Mary had to be healed of those 7 demons. But I like to focus on the fact that Mary was the first to be listed among the women who had been healed and then walked with Christ. These are the same 7 powers or demons that Pope Gregory in the 6th century proclaimed during his homily 33 proved her sinfulness. For me, rather than proving how far she fell, I see the 7 demons as proof of how much she overcame. It feels potent maybe, to make a small yet conscious effort towards reparation, to repair our idea of Mary Magdalene. I'm going to move through the 7 powers she teaches about in her gospel and give my version of a homily or a sermon. And by sermon, I don't mean a formal or official one. They're more like love letters.